Coming up on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, what would it take for the Raiders to move up from number 7 to number 1 in April's draft? We'll talk about that. Plus, we'll take a look at some Tennessee Volunteers that maybe are on the Raiders' radar as they come up and prepare for April's draft. Plus, your calls and texts will close out the show. It's all coming up on a very busy Monday, February 20th, 2023. It's President's Day. Let's get it.
Just win. Just win. Just win. Just win.
The autumn wind is a raider, pillaging just for fun. He'll knock you round and upside down and laugh when he's conquered and won. And won. And won. And won. And won.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen each and every day. Remember, you can find the Locked On Raider podcast free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. Thanks to my man Ari. And as I checked it out just a little while ago, noticed that we're over 4,000 subscriptions by way of YouTube. So thank you so much for everyone who's checked it in, checked it out, liked it, disliked it, whatever the case may be. If you spend a couple minutes just checking it out, we appreciate that. And of course, we appreciate Ari, who's making sure we're up on YouTube each and every day. Today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. If you've ever dreamed about being an NFL GM, basically, if you ever dreamed about being Dave Ziegler, well, this is the game for you. Download the game, visit ultimate-gm.com, or you can look it up in the App Store. All listeners of the Locked On Raider podcast get 100% free boost to their franchise when they use the promo code Locked On. It's all caps, and it's in the App Store. We'll definitely tell you a lot more about them later on in the show, but let's go ahead and jump right into it. And again, today is President's Day, so a lot of folks might be off work. Being able to spend some time at home, get a little R&R, a little rest and relaxation. And for me, the podcast continues, right? Each and every day, we're going to continue to knock out the podcast. I am off of the radio station, though. No Raider Nation Radio 920 Unnecessary Roughness this afternoon. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time at the house and also pay attention to what's going on in the NFL, because that's something that never ends. It's something that never gets quiet. It doesn't take a day off. I mean, it's just a machine that keeps going. So I want to definitely continue to monitor all the news and notes. And I'll say this, coming off the weekend, not a whole lot of news and notes when it comes to the silver and black, but I do think that this is a pretty interesting nugget from Pro Football Focus. A lot of people have hit me up and said, Q, I think the Raiders need to do whatever they need to do to trade up to the number 1 overall spot from number 7. And I've been saying it for a very long time. If you go and look at the draft Bible, as far as the draft compensation, the trade Bible goes, really it's the model that Jimmy Johnson set up a long time ago when they did the Herschel Walker trade, and it's kind of evolved ever since. It's going to take a lot for the Raiders to move up from 7 to 1. I think if they're going to be any kind of trade with the Raiders moving up in the draft, it might be from 7 to maybe 4. Maybe 5, right? But anything higher than that is going to cost a lot. So the example is what Pro Football Focus put out over the weekend. I thought it was really good. For the Raiders to move up all the way to number 1 and get the Bears' first pick, right? That's worth 3,000 points. So what it would take, the Raiders would have to give up their number 7 overall pick, their number 38 overall pick, their number 70 overall pick, in addition to their 2024 first-round pick and 2024 second-round pick, and that would equal about 3,680 points. That's not worth it to me. That's way too much draft capital, and I don't think that there's a guy in the draft. I like Bryce Young a lot. I think C.J. Stroud has got the size of an NFL quarterback, but I like the everything, really, the intangibles that Bryce Young has coming out of Alabama. But I just think that would be way too much capital to spend to go get Bryce Young. Again, think about this. The number 7 overall pick, number 38, number 70, and then in 2024 would have to give up your first-round pick and your second-round pick just to make the trade appeasable and acceptable by the Chicago Bears. Again, that number 1 overall pick is worth about 3,000 points, and if they gave up all those draft picks that I just mentioned, that would be a total of 3,680. So basically, they say the value is 22.7%. And their little write-up on it said, while the Raiders feel like a team that's going to target a veteran, that's often easier said than done. Moving this far down would take the Bears out of the Carter-Anderson sweepstakes, but it would also come with some future picks that could prove to be incredibly valuable. That's from Pro Football Focus. So again, not something that would be likely that Dave Ziegler would want to do is make that massive of a trade. So that's why I don't find that to be something that's actually realistic. Did have one piece of news that I wanted to pass along that had to do with the silver and black. The Raiders actually fired Frank Okam. Frank Okam was the defensive line coach for the Raiders last season under Patrick Graham, and I know Frank Okam for his time at Baylor, and then he went with Matt Rule to Carolina when they were there with the Panthers. He's been a guy that spent some time in the league, but obviously didn't cut it as a defensive line coach. The Raiders only had 21.5 sacks, I believe, along the defensive line for 2022, and clearly that's not enough. So I know everyone's looking for some big additions or changes when it comes to defense and how the Raiders are going to get better defensively in 2023. Well, one move that they feel like they needed to make was getting rid of Frank Okam. And, again, I know him from his time at Baylor, but this is a recurring theme. Again, even Matt Rule, who had him and brought him to Carolina with him, ended up firing him before Matt Rule eventually got fired in Carolina. So I don't know what it is about Frank Okam. He's a heck of a dude. He did some really good things at Baylor along the defensive line, but seems like he hasn't been able to get it done in the NFL. So the one little piece of news coming out over the weekend from the Raiders is that Frank Okam is no longer the defensive line coach, and there has been no replacement announced. There's a couple options there on staff, but no real replacements have been announced yet. Again, that was according to my guy, Vinny Bonsignor from the Review Journal and also Raider Nation Radio 920. He does the morning tailgate every morning from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. Did want to update you on what's going on with Derek Carr. He visited with the Jets over the weekend, and this is one of the few trips that he's made or visits that he's made. And, of course, he visited with the Saints while he's still a member of the Raiders. Now the Jets are the first free agent visit that he made. I think he met with them on Friday and stuck around town around Saturday and met with the coaching staff, went out to dinner. Everything that goes on when it comes to free agency. So I don't think anything's going to happen anytime soon with him. It doesn't really matter, obviously, because he's not a member of the Raiders anymore, but just kind of wanted to update you on what's going on. The good thing for Derek is he's got a month head start over every other free agent in the league because he's, currently a free agent. Well, everyone else has to wait until that March 15th date until the new league year opens up. So as far as the Raiders, and if there's any rumblings on what they're going to do at the quarterback position, if there is a veteran that they're deciding that they're going to go get, regardless of who it is, if it's a Aaron Rodgers, if it's a Jimmy G, if it's a other, whatever the case may be, we probably won't hear anything until the end of the month, which is the scouting combine. When the scouting combine is going on, that's when a lot of business deals end up taking place. So start to look for just kind of sound coming out of Indy around February 27th. That's the end of the month. And then I think the combine gets wrapped up around March 3rd or March 4th. So that whole week in Indianapolis should be a very interesting week for the Raiders, as I know Dave Ziegler will be there. I know Josh McDaniels will be there. Matter of fact, I believe Josh McDaniels is going to be speaking to the media on Tuesday and Dave Ziegler on Wednesday. Maybe that's reversed. Maybe it's Ziegler on Tuesday and Josh McDaniels on Wednesday. One of the two. But you'll probably start to hear something about who the next Raider quarterback will be around that time because, like I said, a lot of business gets done in Indianapolis for the combine, and I'm hoping that I'm there for that as well, just waiting to get my update from the NFL if my credentials have been approved. If they have, then it's on and popping, and there'll be some good stuff coming out of Indy here on the Locked On Raiders podcast. My final little nugget I have for you for segment number 1 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast has to do with an AFC West coach, and that's Eric Bieniemy. He has been hired by the Washington Commanders as the associate head coach, the assistant head coach, and offensive coordinator. So he's Ron Rivera's assistant head coach, but he also is the offensive coordinator. And to me personally, I feel like that's a lateral move. I feel like Eric Bieniemy is a guy that probably should have been a head coach already. I don't know why he isn't. I'm not going to get into the politics of it, of why, he's not a head coach, if he's interviewing bad, if whatever the case may be. That's not my business. I just think that, if he was going to go to a team and be an offensive coordinator, the Washington Commanders is probably the last team I would go to. But according to multiple reports out there, it was something that was very important to him to get that extra title. Again, assistant head coach, being there, the offensive coordinator, where it's all on him, since Ron Rivera is a defensive-minded head coach. And on top of that, he's getting a big bump in pay. And for the Kansas City Chiefs, they've only given him a 1-year contract the last couple of years. So I guess the writing was been on the wall that he was going to be out of there sooner rather than later. So this makes him have a little bit more job security heading over to D.C. as the Washington Commanders offensive coordinator, assistant head coach, and it'll be on him. So if Washington and their offense looks good, then maybe in the next coaching carousel, maybe he'll be a guy that's more heavily considered as a head coach. But again, just kind of blew my mind that he had to make that kind of move to become, to ultimately achieve his goal of being a head coach in the league, and we'll see if that happens. But Eric Bieniemy is no longer in Kansas City. Now he's in D.C. as a Commanders offensive coordinator and also assistant head coach. So that's what I got for you for segment number 1 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Kind of news and notes of the day. Coming up in segment number 2, going to highlight 3 Tennessee Volunteers that potentially could be on the radar of Dave Ziegler and the Raiders coming up in the April draft. We'll do that coming up in segment number 2 after I tell you about the title sponsor, which is the Ultimate Football GM. I have a lot of people hitting me up and say, hey, Q, I actually had text messages. People hit me up. Is this the game you're talking about, the Ultimate Football GM? And yeah, it's real easy to find. All you got to do is go to your app store, check it out, and it is the game for you. I mean, we do it all the time here on the podcast. Hell, we're doing it today, right? Going through prospects, talking about coaches hires, and just trying to build a franchise and guide it into the future and also win a championship. And that's basically exactly what you're going to be doing on this game. Again, it's called the Ultimate Football GM, and it's very challenging. It's very realistic. You can play offline, play on the go as you want, when you want to. And we've even created a Locked On League for you to compete against other Locked On fans all over the world. So you could be the ultimate Locked On Football GM. Choose a Locked On League in the app to join and create your football dynasty. All Locked On Raider podcast listeners get 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On, all caps. It's in the game store. Again, Locked On in all caps. It's in the game store. Check it out today. If you want to download the game, a lot of folks do, visit ultimate-gm.com, or again, look it up on the app store, ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Want to talk about some Tennessee Volunteers, and this is the beautiful thing about the draft process and the draft season. And, of course, free agency still has to hit. We got to see what's going to go on at the Combine. That's the end of February. There's a lot that's going to happen before these players are actually selected at the end of April. But the fun part of this is you can dissect these players and you can break them down as many different ways as you want to. And so on the radio station and here on the podcast, I'm having a lot of fun just kind of going through the process, talking to a lot of different insiders and just really evaluating players just to get a little bit better idea of who these guys are, more than what I just saw from them on Saturday. And so one hot topic is Hendon Hooker out of Tennessee. So I reached out to Rocky Top insider Ric Butler, and that's Rick with a R-I-C, no K on the end, just R-I-C Butler. A really good guy. I had him on my radio show on Friday, had a great conversation. It was probably about 20 minutes talking about all the players that the Tennessee Volunteers are going to be putting into the draft in April, and a lot of these guys are going to be taken off the board pretty quickly. But I just want to focus in on 3 guys. Hendon Hooker, the quarterback, guy that I think was in line to be the Heisman Trophy winner if he hadn't torn his ACL. Jalin Hyatt, the wide receiver out of Tennessee, the guy I talked about on Friday's show, a guy with a whole lot of speed. And then also offensive lineman Darnell Wright out of Tennessee. He's a guy that plays right tackle, so we know that the Raiders have a need at the right tackle position. So if they could find a guy that could sit at that right tackle spot and hold it down for the next 10 years, how great would that be? So I reached out to Rick, got him on my radio show on Friday, and just wanted to bring you a few of the highlights from what he had to say about these different players. So, of course, we got to start at the quarterback position. Hendon Hooker. This is Ric Butler talking about Hendon Hooker, him as a quarterback and also as a leader of men.
Yeah, when you want to talk about quarterbacks, Hendon Hooker is certainly a good one to talk about. 6'4", 280 pounds. This guy is a natural quarterback and a natural leader. I think what you saw at his 2 years from Tennessee was a mature, veteran guy who was really skilled at what he was able to do on the field. He's got a lot of great things going for him, but to me, one of the biggest things is his decision-making. He is an excellent decision-maker, and part of it is just being a quarterback in Josh Heupel's system. To be a quarterback at Tennessee, there's a lot of option routes. There's a lot of pre-snap recognition. There's a lot of quick thinking that you have to do on your feet. Tennessee's had maybe the fastest offense in college football for the past 2 years, and Hendon Hooker obviously has been a big part of that. So he's a great decision maker, a fast release and a strong arm, and he's got good accuracy at each section of the field. I really think he's a solid prospect in this class. Now, of course, does have some deficiencies, does have some concerns, but overall, this is one of the more talked about quarterbacks right now for a reason, even though he's coming off of that ACL injury, which was suffered in late November, although that recovery seems to be going well.
So there you go. There's Rick's thoughts on Hendon Hooker just as a quarterback and then a leader of men and a guy that was at Tennessee for a very long time. The one biggest knock on him, not the torn ACL that he's coming back from, is his age, right? When he gets drafted, he's going to be 25 years old, and then he's still coming off the ACL. He's not going to be ready to play right away. So when does he get out there? What age is he when he gets out there? Is he 26? Is he 27? Right? So that's the biggest knock on him. And it's funny, on my radio show on Friday, I mentioned it could actually help him. Maybe it just makes him a little bit more mature and he learns a little bit quicker on the NFL game and he's able to study a little bit quicker. I mean, look, quarterbacks play for so long that maybe maybe it really wouldn't matter, what his age is, but that's probably the biggest knock on him is his age. So also the final soundbite I have from Ric Butler on Hendon Hooker is just about the learning curve, right? How long does he think it's going to take for Hendon Hooker to go from the college game, Josh Heupel's system, which is very quarterback friendly in college, to all of a sudden being ready to play in the NFL?
Yeah, I think really when you talk about the biggest learning curve that he would have to make, it's just kind of, I think, on one hand, he's got to continue to work on his mechanics and footwork a little bit more. Sometimes it was a little wiry when he would come out of the pocket. Still a very capable quarterback coming out of the pocket. But obviously you can still see improvement there. But I think ultimately you're just looking at a guy who doesn't need a little bit more time, but has used the time very effectively that he's had. I think that development is only going to continue to go. But again, we talk about Josh Heupel's offense. We talk about the system. I am interested to see what this quarterback looks like out of that quick-moving Josh Heupel tempo offense. I am kind of wondering what that would look like in a different offense. Now, I don't think it would be any worse. I still think that Hendon Hooker would be a very capable quarterback, but we also know that he was very successful in that specific offense. So there's still some things he absolutely has to work on. Again, maybe mechanics and footwork a little bit, but I do think that learning curve maybe isn't going to be as steep, just considering he is such an experienced veteran quarterback, if you will.
So the good thing about Hendon Hooker is he's not a guy that's going to go in the first round. The ACL, obviously he's recovering from it, so he's not a guy that you're going to expect to start right away. So he's going to have a little bit of a learning curve, and that's okay. As he's rehabbing and continuing to get better and recovering from that torn ACL, he could be a guy that's, also learning the game, studying the game and preparing himself to be a starter at some point. So if the Raiders had any veteran in front of him for 2 or 3 years, maybe he could eventually be the heir apparent after him. And I know it sounds strange to have a guy sit for 2 or 3 years, but look how long Jordan Love has been sitting in Green Bay. Right? I mean, that's just insane. And he was a former first-round pick. The good thing about Hendon Hooker for me, what I would, make me more comfortable if the Raiders were to go get him is, like I said, he's not going to be a first-round pick. He's going to be a later-round pick, either second or third round, and then that's okay to take a shot because if it works out, great. If it doesn't, that's okay too. You could either flip him or you can hold on to him. You can end up moving on from him, and you don't feel that bad because you didn't make a big, massive move to go get him. But again, he's not the only Tennessee volunteer that's going to be in the draft. As a matter of fact, the first one taken might be Jalin Hyatt, the wide receiver out of Tennessee, 6 foot, 188. Again, he's number 22 on Dane Brugler's top 100 board. He said, for teams looking for a polished route runner who can uncover quickly in the short to intermediate part of the field, Jalin Hyatt won't be valued this high. But for those coveting field stretching speed, tracking skills, and reliable hands, the Tennessee product will have value in the top 25. So the thing I was saying about Hyatt, and I said it on the show on Friday, was the fact that he has speeds more speed. And if you have Devontae Adams, Darren Waller, Hunter Renfrow, and you add that game-breaking speed on the outside as well in Jalin Hyatt, where you're not asking him to do a whole lot, you're just asking him to get deep, get behind the defensive back, and be a big play guy, that would be something that I'd be intrigued by. So here's Ric Butler talking about what Jalin Hyatt would bring to an NFL team.
In the last segment you had in the, I guess, it would be 3 o'clock segment for you, 6 o'clock for me. You said you were talking about a guy, a burner, right? A guy with wheels. To me, Q, that is exactly who Jalin Hyatt is. He's an explosive runner. He is a terrific route runner. He is a tremendous with his breaks in and out of the cuts, and maybe most importantly, he is borderline unstoppable when it comes to those deep threats, just again, because of the pure and raw speed he has with his awareness and his route running capabilities. Now, I do think that when you talk about Jalin Hyatt, you can talk about the 15 touchdowns. You can talk about the fact that he lived behind the defense so often, no matter if you're playing, maybe lower quality teams or higher quality teams like a Florida, like an Alabama, even a little bit against Georgia, he was making plays. So I do think that on that note, he is absolutely a guy that is worth a first-round pick. But there are some concerns to his game. He does have a little bit of a slim build. 6 foot tall, 180 pounds. He's never really struck me as a super well-built player, although we have heard that that's been a point of emphasis in the draft training that he's been going through over the last couple months. He also is a guy that has really benefited from this Tennessee system last year. Look, in his first 2 years, he had 20 receptions and 21 receptions. Then last year, that bumped all the way up to 67. So obviously it has been a breakout career for him, kind of riding the bench a little bit for those first 2 years, and then exploding onto the scene this final year in 2022. So there are some concerns with him. I don't think he's necessarily a guy that can go out there and, he's not the guy that you're asking to go win a 50-50 jump ball.
Right.
But if you're looking for a guy to kind of sneak behind the defense just on a straight go route from any really position on the field, I do think that Jalin Hyatt could be your guy. And I think that could get teams so enticed that they do wind up taking him with a first-round pick.
So there's my guy, Ric Butler, again, the Rocky Top Insider, joined my radio show on Friday, Unnecessary Roughness on Raider Nation Radio 920, to talk about all things Tennessee Volunteers. You heard what he said about what he brings to an NFL team, talking about wide receiver Jalin Hyatt. Again, might be the first guy that is taken off the board from Tennessee in this upcoming draft. And then Butler was so fired up about Hyatt that he actually wanted to elaborate a little bit on how to effectively use him in the NFL.
Q, and one more thing kind of along those lines is that we know that, Tennessee wide receiver Cedric Tillman, who is another strong draft prospect, he, for the most part of the season, until an injury derailed it, he was kind of Tennessee's, if you will, Devontae Adams, maybe the one that takes up a little bit more of the attention from the opposing defense. In a lot of ways, that is how Jalin Hyatt was able to sneak back behind some of these defenses, able to use a little bit of a yin-yang effect with the other wide receivers on the field. So I think you're exactly right in what you're saying there. He could be a very good fit, just knowing how much of the attention that guys like Darren Waller and Devontae Adams are going to take from defenses.
So there you go. He was actually kind of looking at the Raiders roster as well, thinking, okay, this is where he'd fit in if he was that guy. And again, and I know my man Raider Izzy has mentioned to me before about, adding more weapons. And, I wasn't really big on having to add a bunch of weapons, but speed is something that you can't make up for. Speed is fantastic. If you got speed, you got it. Either you got it or you don't, right? So I would be fine if they decided to add some speed right there with the Jalin Hyatt. I don't know if I'd be a fan of the first round, because that would mean that they probably traded back, because he's obviously not going to go in the top 10. He's probably going to go somewhere around that, 20 to 32 range. And if that's the case, the Raiders would have to probably trade back into the first round, or they would have had to trade backwards and get an extra pick, whatever the case may be. So I don't know how that would shake out. Ideally, if he fell to round 2, maybe that would be the sweet spot for the silver and black. And the final guy that I want you to hear about is a guy that I'm very intrigued by. And actually, it's funny because Ric Butler was more excited about this guy than any other guy coming out in the draft when it comes to the Tennessee Volunteers. And that's offensive lineman Darnell Wright. And he's actually, he was number 37 on Dane Brugler's top 100 board. He said an undraftable prospect a year ago. Darnell Wright flipped the script as a senior by moving to right tackle and producing impressive tape, including a standout performance against Will Anderson Jr. He will get himself in trouble when he sacrifices technique for his nasty play style, but he blocks with extraordinary power and torque and stays square in pass protection. So that was Dane Brugler's write-up on Darnell Wright, the offensive lineman out of Tennessee. Here's what Ric Butler had to say about him.
Yeah, guys, believe it or not, this is my favorite draft prospect from Tennessee. I think he is a fantastic player. I think he's going to be a right tackle in the NFL for 10-plus years, just a solid career. Let's talk about this. 6'6", 335 pounds, started all 13 games for Tennessee at right tackle this year, and maybe most impressively, did not allow a sack on pass blocking the entire season, which was over 800 pass blocking snaps. This guy is a bona fide staple of the right side of an offensive line, and I think that he is terrific. We also heard from Jim Nagy and a lot of the other people over at the Senior Bowl a couple weeks ago down in Mobile, Alabama, that he was one of the most impressive players that they had on that offensive line. I think Darnell Wright is an absolutely tremendous first-round draft prospect. I know that some people may be having the first, some people may be having the second, but everything that I saw from him last year was just nothing but impressiveness. In Tennessee's game against Alabama, which we all know the kind of prospect that Will Anderson is on the defensive line for Alabama, Will Anderson, was almost a non-factor against Tennessee in Knoxville back in October, simply because Darnell Wright had his number the entire game long. It was a truly money-making performance for Darnell Wright. So, again, we're talking about a lot of impressive players from Tennessee with Jalin Hyatt and Hendon Hooker. Darnell Wright legitimately might be my favorite prospect from Tennessee heading into the draft, just because of how much of a stout prospect he is.
So there you go right there. As you heard him say, that was the guy he was actually most intrigued by, most fired up by, was Darnell Wright and the prospect of what he could do in the NFL, and even playing him at the right tackle position for the next 10 years. And I'll tell you what, for the Raiders, for the longest, as everyone knows, the Raiders have had a carousel at that right tackle position. At some point, that's got to be solidified. I mean, they had guys after guys after guys having that, 1-year spot, holding it down for 1 year. And then, of course, they brought in Trent Brown thinking he was going to be the guy. That clearly didn't work out. I mean, there's been dude after dude after dude. Jermaine Illuminor, he did okay. Thayer Munford at times did okay. I mean, there's just a bunch of okay at that right tackle position. If the Raiders could ever just solidify that spot and have two bookends tackles that were solid, I mean, just really solid, that you knew what you were going to get out of them each and every week, that would be awesome. So I don't know where Darnell Wright would fall. He's not a first-round guy, in my opinion. He's probably a second or third-round guy. We know that Dave Ziegler has drafted guys out of Tennessee already. He went and got Matthew Butler in the draft last year. So, I mean, that's a guy that he's familiar, or a program he's familiar with. So maybe he would dip back into the Tennessee program and look at a Darnell Wright or a Jalin Hyatt, or maybe even a little bit later, a Hendon Hooker. But this is how we're going to do, man. We're going to break down all different scenarios. Obviously, we're going to talk about veterans because the Raiders still need a quarterback. We don't know who that's going to be, but we're also going to unturn and kind of uncover every stone that is the upcoming draft. So, yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun, and just talking to all those Tennessee Volunteers was fun as well with my guy, Ric Butler, from the Rocky Top Insider, who joined my radio show. So much thanks to him. Coming up in segment number 3, what is on your mind? 707-654-4693. We'll get to your calls and texts. We'll do it next here on the Locked On Raiders podcast. Here we go, Raider Nation. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Your calls and texts straight up that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. Let's start things off with Big Drew in H-Town, Houston, Texas. He's calling to talk about the draft and what he thinks the Raiders should do, and even talks a little free agency as well. Here he is, Big Drew, calling out of Houston.
What up, Q? This is Big Drew calling out of Houston. Just want to chime in a little bit about the draft and whatnot. Right now, everyone's talking about quarterback, rightfully so, and I've heard of even talks of us trading up to go get our guy, and I get it. But I don't think that we're talking enough about maybe trading up and grabbing one of the best defensive players in this draft instead. Jalen Carter or Will Anderson. I think Jalen Carter is the best player in the draft completely. And that way, so I'm thinking that we can draft one of these guys and then go out through free agency and get what we can. We'll have some money. I know that won't be enough to fill up everything possible, but I'm thinking if we can at least bolster up the defense, maybe we can roll with one of these free agent quarterbacks, and I hate to say it, but maybe Jimmy G or Baker Mayfield or even Stidham or whoever else is going to be out there. Kind of like San Francisco, and I'm not saying that we're going to be the 49ers defense. However, 49ers did it with a rookie 7th-round quarterback or wherever he was that he got drafted. I believe it was 7th round. Yeah, Mr. Relevant. Anyways, so I bet that, a player like even Stidham would have had success on that same 49er roster. So I'm thinking rather than addressing the quarterback through the draft, that's a big option, of course, and that's probably where everyone is leaning, including the front office. However, I think that the best players in this draft are defensive players. I don't know, just something to think about. Anyways, Q, I appreciate everything that you're doing. Love the show, man. Been listening for a while now. Everyone have a good day, man. Raider Nation out. Peace.
Thank you so much for the call, my man. I appreciate you. And I don't think they'd trade up to get a defensive player. I really don't. I mean, I mentioned it before. I started off the show talking about trading up and how much you have to give up to trade up. It's not that easy just to say, hey, we want to trade up to number 3 or 4. You're going to give up a lot of capital. I just don't see them doing that. They could stay there at 7 and possibly get a stud on defense, or even trade back and get a couple studs. I'd be good with that. I just don't see them trading up. That's just my thoughts, though. But thank you so much for that call. I do appreciate you. Next up, got a text from Raider Ange. AQ, I've seen several mock drafts, and most of them have the Raiders picking an offensive tackle at number 7. There are other good players that they could take other than offensive tackle. Last year, they picked up Parham and Mumford. Mumford doesn't look like a 7th-round pick. He looks not bad as a rookie, and he may have a future at right tackle. I believe the Raiders should invest in improving the defense. I like Devin Witherspoon or Joey Porter Jr. at 7. The 2nd-round pick, I hope they get a good coverage, fast linebacker like Trenton Simpson. The Raiders' defense has been ranked in the 20s for years, and that is unacceptable. Just win, baby. That's Raider Ange, and thank you for the text. And, yeah, they don't have to get an offensive tackle at number 7. The reason why is this is a really good offensive line draft. You can get offensive linemen. As you mentioned, they got multiple offensive linemen last year. I think that they'll have a really good a good run at the offensive lineman. And as I mentioned with Darnell Wright, he's not a guy that's going to go in the first round. He may be a tackle, though, that would be a good, solid spot later on in the draft, and you get him, and he ends up being a really good bookend for, 5, 6, 7 years, whatever the case may be, maybe even a 10-year veteran. Who knows? So I do think the offensive line needs to be addressed. I don't think they have to address it at number 7. I'm with you at number 7 as far as defense. Joey Porter Jr. is a guy that I like a lot. Matter of fact, it's probably a guy that I'm going to try to feature sooner rather than later, get somebody on from Penn State who can give me a little bit more breakdown on Porter. I like him a lot. So The defense needs to be much improved. It doesn't have to be lights out. It doesn't even have to be as good as the Philadelphia Eagles, but it's got to be complementary of the Raiders offense. And the Raiders offense at one point in 2022 was all the way up to number 12. It was really higher than that, but I think they settled in at number 12, which isn't bad. That means you can win a lot of games, but you have to be able to stop someone as well. Thanks for that text. I do appreciate you. Next up, got a call from Brother Dre in the ATL calling out of Atlanta. He's calling to talk about the team and what the Raiders need to do and why he doesn't think it's so complicated. Here he is, Brother Dre, calling out the ATL.
Q, it's Brother Dre in Atlanta. I'm on the way to work, and I'm about to go crazy here, man. Why are we making this so complicated for ourselves as Raider fans? Listen, offense is not the problem. What's that old adage? Offense sells tickets, defense wins championships. Our problem is on the defensive side. When it comes to the quarterback, yeah, I know we need a quarterback, but we don't need Aaron Rodgers as far as I'm concerned. We need to solidify the defense and let that free agent, that big signing, that free agent quarterback, let that be the cherry on the top after you've established all these other pieces. Solidify that defense and then come back to the quarterback, I'd say, because you're not going to have enough money to be able to do it the other way around. Yeah, you'll win some games, you'll sell some tickets, but it's not going to really be, have that long-term impact that I think that it's going to have. It's more that flash, and people love the sexy names and that sizzle and all that sort of thing. But I would be much more happy with the Raiders if they took a step back, took a look at what they need. We talked the other day, they were talking about best player available. Well, you need to get the best player available that fits a need or that meets a need. So if you want to solidify that defense, you get the best defensive player to help you, then that's what you do. And all this talk about, these high, heck, if it was a matter of getting the best quarterback, well, heck, Lamar Jackson is the best quarterback out there to be able to compete with Patrick Mahomes. But if you got him, you are completely strapped for the next, 5+ years. So who wants to do that, right? Let's be smart, Raider fans. Let's be smart now. Let's get this defense in order and deal with the quarterback sort of later. You can get enough offensive punch, I would think, out of a lesser quarterback, a less expensive quarterback. Talk about Baker Mayfield. I don't like Baker Mayfield personally, but hey, I think he's someone who could get you by, considering all the other weapons that you have. Yeah, Devontae Adams probably wouldn't like that, but I mean, hey, this is not Devontae Adams' team, by himself, to be honest with you. So I think that he could be okay with it. And if next year if we have a great defense and we get everything all in order this year, and then next year we go for that high dollar free agent, I'd feel a whole lot better about that than trying to do it now. I feel like you're putting the cart before the horse if you do the high dollar free agent quarterback now. Anyway, that's all I got. Brother Dre out. Later.
Thank you for the call, my man. Defense is absolutely what is needed for the Raiders to be successful, right? I mean, you got to have a big-time quarterback. You do. I just, with the division that the Raiders are playing in with Mahomes, Herbert, Wilson, even in the conference, playing in the AFC, when you have Josh Allen, you have Lamar Jackson, you have Joe Burrow, right? I mean, whoever's going to be in Miami. I know Tua's there right now, and I think that he's a good quarterback, but I don't know what his health is like. So, I mean, there's just a lot of really talented folks, in fact, talented teams, I should say, in the AFC conference in general. So they've got to be able to have a quarterback that can compete with them. There's a reason why the Jets want Rodgers. There's a reason why the Raiders' name is, kind of surrounded with Rodgers. Tampa Bay. I mean, all this. There's reasons why these teams want quarterbacks, need quarterbacks, because they want someone that's really good. They don't want just somebody who's just average, just a jag, just another guy, right? So, I mean, I think that you do have to have a big-time quarterback, but you also definitely need to address the defense, like you mentioned. Thank you for that call, my man. Definitely appreciate you. We'll see how it all shakes out, right? I mean, it's going to be a while. It's going to be an interesting ride until it's all said and done. But again, like I said, thank you so much for your call. Just got a couple more. Got a text from T3 Raider Facts. It says, "Hey Q, it's T3 Raider Facts on your Thursday radio show last week. You posed a question to your listeners about who to bring in from the outside. If you could bring in 2 players either by trade or free agency. So I thought I'd just focus on free agency and ask this: if you could pick just one free agent for offense and one for defense, who would your 2 guys be? Mine would be the return of Rodney Hudson on the offensive side and stun linebacker Tremaine Edmonds on defense. Interested to hear your thoughts. Thanks again for all you do for Raider Nation. That's T3 Raider Facts. And if I was just focusing on defense, I think Rodney Hudson is getting pretty old now. I think Rodney Hudson is kind of beyond his better years. He seemed like he dropped off in Arizona. I don't know that 100%, but I feel like that's what it was, and he was injured and banged up quite a bit. That's just me. If I'm focusing just on free agency when it comes to, guys on the outside, bringing them to the Raiders, Daron Payne, I've mentioned him multiple times. That'd definitely be one guy that I focus in on. And let's see, one other guy. I'd probably go after a corner. As I mentioned a couple days ago, like Byron Murphy. He's a corner from Arizona. He'd be cheaper. He's about $8 million. They're estimating he'd cost per year. I would probably bring a guy in like Byron Murphy and then Daron Payne. Daron Payne would be the high-ticket guy, and Byron Murphy would be a lesser-ticket guy. But I think he'd be a solid corner. If you had him, maybe traded for a guy like Jalen Ramsey and then had Nate Hobbs still, I mean, that's a pretty salty little secondary that you have right there. So I'd be okay with that. Those would be the two guys that I focus in on. Byron Murphy, the corner from Arizona, and also Daron Payne, the defensive tackle with the Washington Commanders. Let's take one more call as we wrap up the show today. Army Raider, he's calling to talk about the thoughts of Anthony Richardson as the Raiders quarterback and also talking about building through the draft. Here he is, Army Raider.
What's up, Q? It's your boy Army Raider, just catching up on these last few days. Gotta say, I'm kind of surprised at all the people in Raider Nation who are calling for Anthony Richardson as, a possible draft pick. And I'll tell you, every single one of those cats that doesn't watch college football. The guy had 2 games and was largely suspect outside of that. I mean, he's got the accuracy of a blind man in a dart throwing competition. And yeah, he has a strong arm and good athleticism, but accuracy is a bigger factor in the NFL game. The other thing I'll say is I'm a little worried going into season, you got to build through the draft and free agency is a minor thing, but if we're being honest, between McDaniels and the new GM and associate GM, not a single one of them has showed the ability to have a solid draft or a solid free agency cycle. I mean, if we're honest, outside of Devontae Adams, the free agency cycle sucked it up last year, and McDaniels in his Denver stint was god awful at it, and none of them's done a solid draft. Last year's draft was spotty. I mean, I'd be curious to hear you say what your thoughts are, but I don't think they're really all that so far as drafting and free agency. So where's the we're going to kill it coming from? Not from you, but from the fan base where they just assume they're going to kill it in free agency in the draft. Anyways, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Army Raider out. Peace and love to all. Love each other. There's no reason to be dumb.
Thank you for the call, my man. I appreciate you. And that was really the point I was trying to make about Anthony Richardson. And I know a lot of people took it wrong. Not a lot of people, but a few people took it wrong and decided that they wanted to try to blow it up and make it seem like I was trying to be disrespectful, which definitely was not the case. He has a huge ceiling. That's the bottom line. He has a huge ceiling, but he also has a very low floor. And nobody has any idea where he's going to end up. Nobody could just kind of finger point and say, okay, this is who he's going to be. There's just so many questions. He had moments where he flashed at Florida, and then he had moments that people said, what the hell was that? And so that's why everyone's so, just kind of wondering about him, like, who in the hell is he going to be? So I don't know what Anthony Richardson is going to be. As far as building through the draft, I think that that's the way to do it. The Raiders just haven't done it in years. The Raiders have historically not done well with the draft, and that's something that they have to do. Last year, I think Dave Ziegler and company did a decent job with what they were given. Remember, they didn't have their first pick till round 3. So, I mean, it's a little bit different. They went and made the move for Devontae Adams. I thought they did really well with that. They also didn't have their own scouts in place. They didn't have guys out there in the field looking for players that are fitting their vision. So that's why I'm intrigued by this year, because we don't know, right? We don't know what it's going to look like, what the draft is going to look like. But if they stay status quo and they don't make a trade for like Aaron Rodgers and have to give up draft capital to go get him, they're going to have a handful of picks, like 10 or 11 draft picks. And so you give Dave Ziegler that many opportunities, I'm interested to see what it looks like. He's had a whole year with his staff out in the field looking for his type players. So I would love to see what they come back with, because at some point, whether it's this staff or another staff with the Raiders, they've got to figure out how to get it done in the draft. If you cannot get it done in the draft, you're going to fail. You're going to have to build your team through free agency and make a bunch of trades, and that never works. It doesn't work for the long haul. It just doesn't. And so they've got to find a way to start being consistently good in the draft, and they have not done that. You know, I mean, when we can sit there and point to, oh, that draft was really good and, oh, that draft was okay. Like the last really good draft that the Raiders had was 2019, right? And that wasn't hitting on their first round picks outside of Josh Jacobs. But 2019 produced what, Max Crosby, Hunter Renfrow, Josh Jacobs, right? I mean, those 3 guys right there that are key players on this Raiders team. You know, and so, I mean, outside of that, what have they done? They've got to find a way to start getting it done. That's why I'm excited about this draft. It's coming up in Kansas City. I'm expecting to be there to provide all the coverage. And again, it's the first time that the Raiders ever need a quarterback, right? Since I've been doing this, it's the first time that they've needed a quarterback. So it just makes it that much more intriguing. So thank you so much for that call. I do appreciate you. And that's all the time I got for on today's show on this President's Day. Again, if you're off, hopefully you're enjoying some time off with the family, getting a little R&R, a little rest and relaxation before you get back on the grind tomorrow. So maybe you'll hear the show today. Maybe you'll hear it tomorrow, whatever the case may be. Glad to be here for you each and every day. And, of course, I'll be back on my radio show tomorrow afternoon as well at 2 o'clock Pacific time on Raider Nation Radio 920. So until tomorrow, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.